Hey there, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Elisa. If you have never been here before, I create my dream wardrobe from scratch and I also sell my original digital sewing patterns on Etsy, which might be why you're here today. And if it's not, you just made a discovery. We're gonna make the Sofia dress today, which was actually the second ever sewing pattern that I launched on my Etsy shop last year around July time, after having worked on it for about 3 months and having tested it with about 16 people. While nothing has actually changed about the sewing pattern as such, a lot of things around it have changed, so today I want to give the tutorial a little bit of love. This sewing pattern has become a staple in my Etsy shop. It's one of my absolute best sellers and I can see why, because if you picture a wedding guest outfit, this is the dress that you probably imagine. You don't need anything else if you have this in your wardrobe. Maybe you want like 3 of the same in a different color, but this is the ultimate wedding guest dress slash occasion dress slash summer dress, and I still love it to this day. If you have never seen the dress before, here are some of the design details. Firstly, we have a neck halter top that is held up by a strap in the neck, as the name suggests, and it has a twisted appearance. It's not actually twisted. The skirt is actually quite simple, but it has a finessed shape in the waist that follows the shape of the bodice and flows down in a half circle. So all in all, the pattern piece is actually quite sophisticated in how you assemble them to make something that looks quite complicated when in reality it's really simple. One thing I want to mention is that the pattern for the skirt comes in a mini length as a standard, and that is mainly so that we save ink, paper and time, so that we don't have to assemble 100 pages to get the perimeter of the half circle skirt. Rather, I would suggest that you add or subtract an equidistant amount to the existing hemline so you can adjust the pattern and make it the length that you want it to be. In terms of materials, here's a list of the things you need. The dress works the best if it's made in flowy fabrics such as silks, satins, crepes, chiffons. Anything that is lightweight and has a drape is ideal and makes the silhouette of the dress shine. Today, for myself, I have actually been heavily inspired by one of my customers who made the Sofia dress in this drop that gorgeous yellow, I think it's a mulberry silk she mentioned. And ever since I saw this, I knew that I had to have the Sofia dress in a similar fabric. So today I'm going to work with this marigold yellow viscose satin. If you purchase this pattern, you will find 4 files in your downloads. You will find a A0 file that you can bring to the copy shop. You will find A4 and US letter PDF versions that you can print at home. And you will also find a pattern introduction sheet that explains a few things about the pattern, but specifically also how to cut the pattern pieces to get them in the shape that you need them to be in, which, if you've done everything correctly, should look a little bit something like this. Once you're at this point, you can start sewing. So let's. Alright, so this is what our pattern pieces look like once they're cut, and I want you to pay a little bit of attention to this area right here. These are pleats that you're going to place instead of darts, and you want to mark certain elements of those pleats so when you remove your paper pattern you still know where to place things. Specifically this line up here, place a little notch in your seam allowance where that line is, and then the upper line of this pleat as well. Now it says pleat downwards here, and what I mean by that is that you pleat it downwards on the inside of your garment so that the opening of the pleat looks upwards on the outside. So let me remove the paper pattern and reveal to you what this actually looks like, because it's quite neat, as it is a sort of butterfly. This is your center front and this is your neckline. So what you want to do is you want to fold your piece along your neckline with the right sides touching like this. So the 2 V's, which is the V in the shell and the V in the lining, so the V in the inside and the V on the outside, are flush on top of each other. So now you can go ahead and place a few pins here, because this is the first thing that we want to sew. So you can now go ahead and sew this V shape with a stitch length of maybe 3.5. It doesn't have to be too small. And also make sure that you place a silk needle into your sewing machine, or a needle that is very fine, maybe around 70. So once this shape is sewn, you want to make sure that you snip your seam allowance right here in the tip of the V. Make sure you don't cut through the seam that you've just placed. This is just so that we release the tension when we now reach into the two layers, like right here, and we grab the other end and turn it outside out. And now we have a nicely overturned V right here that we need to press. Don't forget, the quality of your sewing is really mainly determined by one thing, which is whether you press your seams or not. Once pressed, everything should sort of look like this. What you do now is you reach in between your two layers and find the end of your V and guide it towards each other like this. You then fold open one side and fold it over the other so you can hold on to it like this. What you want to do is to now pin the two legs of the V dead center on top of each other with a few pins. We are now closing our center front seam. This is what's going on here. And this is also where you can decide how revealing you want the bodice to be, because here's where you can determine how low the keyhole is that holds the neck strap. If you want it to be a little bit more demure, you can close it almost all the way up. If you want to have a little bit of décolleté, you can leave it a little bit further open. That's totally up to you. Important is just that you really pin those two seams on top of each other. You want to fold the seam allowance one way and then stitch on your machine on the opposite side of the seam allowance, just shy of the seam that you've placed previously. So this is the seam that I have just placed, and when I turn everything right sides out again, this is what I get. And you can see that the keyhole is here and the center front seam is nicely closed, and you will see that there's a right side and a wrong side based on the look of it. This is your outside. So the most complicated part is already done. What we need to focus on now are our pleats on our sides. One thing to mention is that whenever you work with slippery fabric, it is hard to keep everything in place. So you can see that it's twisting a little bit that way on this side and it's twisting out the other way on that side. That is okay. Don't be deterred by this. Just make sure that you follow the principle of the pattern and that you follow your outlines. Don't be discouraged by this. So just pull it the way it needs to be. You can even, if you want to, cut it a little bit more evenly to get this more straight if you wanted to. That's just the nature of the fabric you're working with. And you can see that when I cut it back, it looks a little bit more cleaner immediately. So focusing on our pleats, what you do is you grab the negative of the first pleat right here and you guide it upwards to the notch that you've placed previously. Place a pin here. I will say that this fabric is a lot less easy to work with than any of the silk that I've worked with previously, but we'll get there anyway. You will want to make sure that the tip right here goes flush with the side of your bodice, like so. Same thing on the other side. Okay, so once your pleats are in, do cross-reference your two sides because you do want to make sure that the pleats are placed the same on both sides, which if you follow your darts should be the case. And now what you can do is just baste them down with a big stitch length on your sewing machine so they don't come undone again. All right, the front is prepared and it's looking good. And that means the most difficult part of the pattern is actually already done. We can now move on to the back, which is much easier. Looks like this. We have 4 layers of the same fabric / if you chose a different lining fabric than shell, then you have 2 of your lining and 2 of your shell. And you will have to overturn these 2 with each other along the back neckline. So I'm going to pin these together. Now we need to join the front and the back, and this is also a little special. Let me show you how. While I cannot fully hide all of the raw seams in the inside of the dress. I want to hide as many of the raw seams as I can. And for that, what I want to do is to place firstly the right sides touching, front and back. We're going to unfold shell and lining of the back. And we're going to pin this and align it with the side of the front. Firstly, we pin one layer, then we grab the other side, which is the lining, and fold it over, and now we sandwich the front of the bodice in between the shell and the lining of the back piece. So now we're using the pins that I've just placed before to pin all of the layers together. And the one thing that is important to do is to make sure that here on the inside we are not catching any of the main area of the front bodice. We only sew up the side seam, and I would recommend that you place the seam that holds the shell and the lining of the back neatly down onto the edge of your front neckline. And now I'm going to sew that down. And now before I turn it back around, I'm going to cut the seam allowance back here a little bit, and then I do this, and ideally we have a nicely overturned side. Alright, the last thing to do to finish the top of the dress is to sew the scarf that's going to hold the neck halter up and around your neck. And for that, I have just ripped 2 pieces of my fabric remnants that is exactly the size of the pattern piece in the pattern PDF, which is 20 centimeters wide and 1 meter long. Ideally, you would place this along a fabric fold. I did not have one, so what I need to do is firstly sew my 2 pieces right sides touching. Now that I have sewn it together and I have one long continuous piece, I can go ahead and fold this in half so that I eventually, once I have overturned this, receive a 10 centimeter wide shawl. Alright, so now we can move on to our skirt, and for that it is important to first decide how you want to finish it. And I want to add a little bit of razzle dazzle to my dress by adding a lining skirt, and I have chosen this power mesh right here that I feel like is the perfect material to line your summer dresses with because it feels like there's nothing there. Alternatively, you could go for traditional lining material like acetate lining, but I think for the breathability of the dress and for the comfort of it, this type of mesh material is just perfect. So I'm taking this and my shell layer and I will attach it to the bodice now. Alright, so step number 1 is to place your bodice in front of you. Right side's facing up, so it's facing you. You then want to grab your shell layer and find the waist. And the waist has this slightly peculiar shape, as you can see, and that is because it follows the shape of the bodice. So now that the skirt is placed also facing right sides up, you can take your bodice and flop it over like this, so the right sides of the skirt and the bodice are facing. I now start with my center front apex in the skirt and the seam in the bodice, and I place those flush on top of each other. I then move over to my side, and ideally the side seam of your skirt should coincide with the dip in the skirt waist. The important thing is that the waist is flush and there's no pleats anywhere. And then from that side point, you can move on towards the back. Once you have pinned your shell layer, you can grab your lining layer and you do the same thing from the other side, effectively sandwiching your bodice in between shell and lining. And I'm now simply going to repurpose the pins I've just placed and use them to also pin down my power mesh. It's important that I don't stretch it because then it's going to distort the shape of the waist seam, trying to do it as relaxed as possible. The nice thing about the power mesh is that it's not only great at regulating your body temperature, you also don't have to finish it at all because it doesn't fray. So if you give it a nice clean cut, you're gonna have a super nice hem that you don't have to work on any further. Alright, so now we have our lining and shell sandwich with the bodice in between the two. And now I can sew my side seam following the shape that is this zigzag. So now before I turn it around, I'm just going to give the seam a few snips just to relax the tension in the waist and so that it folds over nicely. Okay, and now when we fold the lining over and grab the bodice, we can see that we have a beautiful finish on the outside, but we also have a neat finish on the inside. I'm gonna press this now. All right, final step, can you believe it? So we are now going to insert our center back zipper into the open center back. Unfortunately, that's the best color match that I could find, which is no color match at all because it's neon yellow and I have this golden yellow. I gotta work with this somehow. So because of the way this dress is constructed, I cannot hide the zipper in between the lining and the shell. So I will have to make sure that I place it neatly and as invisibly as possible so that we cannot see this atrocious color on the outside. On the inside, I can then choose whether I want to just serge the zipper tape / seam allowance in the inside to keep it clean, or if I want to add some bias binding to make it even more beautiful. What we need to do is to have one side of our bag facing right sides up, and then we need to take our zipper and have it facing right sides down. So basically the head and the face of the zipper handle needs to look down like this. What I want is that the head of the zipper also is almost flush with the edge of my center back here. So now I'm simply going to pin this all the way down, and I want to make sure that I catch both my shell and lining layers of the skirt when I pin this down. The zipper is 30 centimeters to blend that in the editing process. Note to myself. Okay, so once this is pinned down like this, I'm gonna baste this first section. Once this is basted down, I close my zipper again and I grab tailor's chalk / a removable fabric pen, and I mark my waist seam on the zipper tape towards the other side so I can align this with the opposite side of my dress, and I do the same thing here for the top of my neckline. So now I find the other side and I try as best as I can to align these markings with the necessary spots. So here that would be the waist and the neckline, and then I pin down the skirt, again making sure I catch both my layers. Now I take this to my machine and baste it down as well. Okay, now I can check whether things match up, and they seem to almost perfectly. And now would be a good time to try the dress. So let's do that. I'm pleased now I can finalize the installment of the zipper and move on to the hem. So now that I know that the placement of the zipper is good, I'm gonna go ahead and uncurl the teeth of the zipper and stitch as closely to them as possible. If you have a zipper foot, you don't have to do that because your zipper foot will have already done this for you in one step, but I don't, so I have to give it a second row of stitches. So here is a little tip for you when you work with circle or half circle skirts. What happens here is that we have longer sides than we have fronts and backs, and that is because the sides of the skirt are on the bias, whereas the front and the back are on the grain line. So when we hang up the dress and we leave it there for a couple of hours to a day, we will find that the sides drop quite dramatically. So what we need to do now is to put the dress on a hanger or a mannequin and try to find a nice equidistant line from the floor that then gives us a nice straight hemline. And what we had in fashion school, which was actually the device that had tailor's chalk dust in it and a little pump, so you could squish it and it would create a nice level line to the ground onto the skirt. I don't have that, so what I'm going to use is a tripod. I have tried the dress yesterday and made a mark where I want the skirt to end, how long I want it to be. And now what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to use that tripod, put it on the level that I made that mark, and go around the skirt, and with a removable fabric pen I'm going to mark the length of the skirt all around. finish off the dress, I'm going to create a rolling hem. For that, I'm first going to fold over the length of my dress by a minimal amount, and I'm trying to follow the natural curvature of the skirt, and I'm sewing as closely to that folded edge as possible. After that, I'm cutting back my seam allowance to a total bare minimum, as close to the stitch that I've just placed as possible. And then I'm going to roll that over once again and top stitch it once again to finish off my rolled hem. This is the perfect hemming method for any silky fabrics.
Nobody told you this before, but you outshine the sun. The type that I've been looking for. I've seen you inside my dreams. So baby, come a little closer. Know that you are the only one. I wanna see your body move. Don't be afraid. And baby, keep the lights on. And baby, keep the lights on. So can we keep the lights on? I wanna see you. This world can be an ugly place. Sometimes it brings out the worst in us. But when I see your pretty face, it all fades away. Yeah. Let me climb up the mountain. Let me search through your valleys. I got my eyes wide open. Baby, don't hide. And baby, keep the lights on. And baby, keep the lights on. Yeah, can we keep the lights on? I wanna see you. Baby, keep the lights on. Baby, keep the lights on. Yeah, can we keep the lights on?
Alright everybody, that's the end of today's tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like this version of the Sofia dress pattern. The pattern is available on my Etsy shop as ever. Nothing has changed there. If there's anything that's still unclear, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Etsy Messenger. I will try to respond to all of your questions. That's that. I hope you give this sewing pattern a go, and I see you next time. Bye bye.